Thank you, and thank you to the ECR for having me here. I think I'd like to bring up 3 points regarding the rights of member states and how we can reform the EU to better address this issue. I think it's an issue which clearly is a big part of the UK's reform process, but goes to the heart of questions in many other member states. And I think we are seeing the fact that there is declining support, or has been declining support for the EU and its institutions, a number of tensions between different member states, and poor turnout at European elections, highlighting that this is an issue for many countries. I think that in terms of the 3 key issues for me, we've heard mentions of them already, but the euro, non-euro issue, finding a better settlement between those inside and outside the eurozone, getting a better link between national parliaments and democratic accountability at the national level and EU policy, and then also finding a better democratic settlement for the eurozone in the longer term, and a clearer picture for where the eurozone is going. So let me just talk about those 3 points in a bit more detail. The non-euro eurozone issue is crucial for me. I think that as the eurozone integrates and we don't know exactly where it's going, it's clear that a clearer settlement is needed, and a process for engagement. I think Johan van Overtveld touched on this. It needs to be a transparent relationship, it needs to be accountable, and both sides need to know where they stand. And I think at the moment that is not quite the case. We have a very ad hoc relationship, and every time the eurozone proposes a change, there needs to be another negotiation and a separate negotiation about how this impacts the non-eurozone countries. So I think a mechanism that can set the terms of engagement between the two sides, allow everyone to know where they stand and know that their rights will be respected, is something that is vitally needed, and I think that's something that clearly is part of David Cameron's reform package, as we heard from Ashley before. I think there is also another aspect to this which Open Europe has proposed and others have proposed and is touched upon in David Cameron's letter, and the idea that the EU is not a single currency union any longer, if it ever was. It is a multi-currency union, and I think that needs to be accepted and enshrined in the institutional setup. Again, this may be largely symbolic, but I think it's important to make sure we don't have any second-class members in the EU, and to make sure that everyone realises that no matter your currency, you are a valid part of the EU, and that is not a prerequisite for being an EU member. So I think that is another important part here. In terms of the national parliaments, we've heard about the red card, and maybe Sajid will go into more details, but I would just point, it's not a choice between the European Parliament or the national parliaments, but I think for me it's also part of a bigger question around the community and redressing the balance between the community institutions and the member states. I think we have a number of community institutions, but only really one member state institution, and I think bringing in a greater role for national parliaments will help redress that balance, will help citizens feel closer to the decision-making process, and I think ultimately at the moment citizens still look mostly to national representatives for accountability and influence over policy, even at the European level. So I think there is a very important need for that kind of setup. I think there are plenty of ways to do it. The red card is certainly one of them. I think it was interesting to hear about the desire there for a lowering of the threshold. That's certainly something I'm sure the UK would agree with, but I think in terms of the technical changes and whether that takes you into a potential treaty change area, I think that it might be a difficult issue to overcome in these negotiations, but it's certainly something that will be explored and is worth exploring in more detail. This also comes into other areas. We've heard from the Netherlands previously the suggestion of a green card where national parliaments can look to review older legislation or even propose legislation, and even what's known as a late card where national parliaments can look to remove legislation that has simply been hanging around for too long, as often happens at the EU level. In terms of the final branch here, the Eurozone changes, this is clearly the most important, I guess, and the trickiest, I would say. But I think for me, the biggest challenge that came out of the Eurozone crisis that was not that it became a clash of ideologies, but that it became a clash of democracies. What was democratically anchored in Greece, namely in terms of the desire for debt relief and write-downs, was a direct democratic clash with what is voted for and supported in Germany and other countries. So I think that tension that we have seen is very difficult to solve and needs to be broached in any future Eurozone settlement. As Johan touched upon as well, there are other tensions in terms of solidarity, in terms of control and the source of money, and these are issues which still need to be settled. Johan sketched out a vision of how this might be done. I don't think there's a single option that is perfect for the Eurozone. There is a rules-based system that could work, but I don't think that the status quo we have at the moment is necessarily an option. Even if you go for a rules-based system, I do think you need to have significant changes in the banking union, some level of mutualisation through a backstop, as was mentioned. So I think that whatever happens, there will be a need to give a new democratic mandate to the Eurozone, and I think a lot of countries will need to refresh that mandate. And until that's done, I think there will be some unease amongst a number of member states in the Eurozone. So I think the UK reform process is clearly a good start to tackling this question, and I hope that other member states will take the opportunity to also address it, since it fits with a number of other countries concerned. And I think it also helps to make clear that what the UK is asking for is not just UK exceptionalism, but is a real wholehearted reform of the EU as a whole. I'll leave it there.